Sales are terrific out there, so you're my kind of crowd. I've been getting reports. We're breaking all kinds of records. And we're going to start off with question number 26, which goes to station 2.
Hi, Warren and Charles. My name is James from Malaysia. Given the recent challenge faced by the major US bank, what is your overall outlook on the banking industry? How do you assess the risk and the opportunity in this section?
Well, anticipating a few questions on banks, I decided we should start using bank language here to describe and Charlie. The situation in banking is very similar to what it's always been in banking, that fear is contagious, always. And historically, sometimes the fear was justified, and sometimes it wasn't. My dad lost his job in 1931 because of a bank run, and they had a bank run on state banks. And the head of the Omaha National Bank said, well, we're a national bank, and they didn't have a run on the national banks. And of course, they both faced the same problem. So it used to be that if you saw people lining up at a bank, the proper response was to get into the line. And you'd always leave it. And the story is that Sidney Weinberg of Goldman Sachs, during one of the great bank runs back in 1907 or thereabouts, had a job as a runner at Goldman Sachs and asked his boss if he could take the week off. And the boss said, sure, not much is going on anyway. So he got in line, whether it was the Knickerbocker Trust or wherever. And as he got toward the front of the line, he sold his place in line to somebody. He didn't have an account at the bank, but that was an asset. And the banking system has changed so much over the years, and we did something enormously sensible, in my view. When we set up the FDIC, as many as 2,000 banks had failed in 1 year back after World War I. I mean, bank runs were just part of the picture. And if you have people that are worried about whether their money is safe in a bank and all trying to withdraw it, you can't run an economy very well. So the FDIC was very logical. It's got changed over the years some. But here we are in 2023, and we actually see the FDIC pay off at 100 cents on the dollar to everybody, or make it available on all demand deposits. And yet you still have people very worried about their periodically, geographically, all kinds of crazy ways. And that just shouldn't happen. So the messaging has been very poor. It's been poor by the politicians, who sometimes have an interest in having it poor. It's been poor by the agencies, and I'd say it's been poor by the press. I mean, you shouldn't have so many people that misunderstand the fact that although there may be a debt ceiling, it's going to get changed. Although there's a $250,000 limit on the FDIC and the U.S. government and the American public have no interest in having a bank fail and have deposits actually lost by people. We had a demonstration project the weekend of Silicon Valley Bank, and the public is still confused. So it's something to have a law that was passed in or a law that became effective in 1934, although modified in some ways, not understood about something as important has a banking system. I don't think the American public is that dumb. And I just, well, I made that offer over in Tokyo, incidentally, that I haven't heard from anybody that wants to take up my $1 million bet on whether the public will lose money if they have a demand deposit at a bank, no matter what the size. So that's the world we live in. It means that a lighted match can turn into a conflagration, or it can be blown out, and who knows what will happen. And we don't have any worry. We keep our money in cash and treasury bills at Berkshire because we keep $128 billion or whatever it was at the end of the quarter, and we want to be there if the banking system temporarily even gets stalled in some way. It shouldn't. I don't think it will, but I think it could. And I think that the incentives in bank regulation are so messed up, and so many people have an interest in having them messed up, that it's totally crazy. I mean, the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were doing 40% or so of the mortgage business in the United States. That is huge. They were regulated, just those two companies were regulated by some group, I forget what they called it, but they had 150 people that were in charge of just figuring out whether Freddie and Fatty were doing the right thing. Well, I could have done it. Charlie could have done it. And I'm not sure they needed an assistant even to do it. But the incentives were all wrong. And Freddie and Fannie, which were doing fine in August or apparently doing fine in July and August of 2008, were put into conservatorship, early in September. And the things that followed from that were just incredible. So there are second order and third order and fourth order effects that are somewhat unpredictable as to what they will be and the sequence and all that, but things change. And if people think that deposits are sticky anymore, they're just living in a different era. You press a button, you don't have to get in a line and wait for days and have the teller counting out the money slowly in gold so that you hope the line goes away. You can have a run in a few seconds. So the way it hasn't been addressed properly is a problem, and who knows where it leads. But you'll have to have a punishment for the people that do the wrong thing. And if you take First Republic, for example, you could look at their 10K and you could see that they were offering non-government guaranteed mortgages in jumbo amounts at fixed rates, sometimes for 10 years before they changed to floating. And I mean, that's a crazy proposition. If it's to the advantage of the bank, they get it. They get the guy coming in and says, I'll refinance at 1.5% and then 1%. And if it's advantage the other way, the fellow keeps it out 10 years. You don't give options like that. But that's what First Republic was doing, and it was plain sight. And the world ignored it till it blew up. And some of the stock in some of these banks that were held by insiders was sold, and who knows whether they had a plan or whether some plan that was innocent, or whether they started sensing what was coming. But you do know that the directors are not going to be able to read some book or anything like that, but they do have the ability to hold the CEO accountable. The CEO gets the bank in trouble. Both the CEO and the directors should suffer. The stockholders of the future shouldn't suffer. They didn't do anything. It doesn't teach anybody any lessons or anything. It teaches the lesson is that if you run a bank and you screw it up, you're still a rich guy, and the clubs don't drop you, and and the charity groups don't quit asking it to their benefits, and the world goes on. That is not a good lesson to teach people who are holding the behavior of the economy in their hands. So I think there's some work to be done, but I don't think it's not a difficult problem. It's just we screwed up the answer and we screwed up the communication of it. Charlie?
Well, I'm so old-fashioned that I kind of liked it better when banks didn't do investment banking. That makes me very outmoded in the modern world.
And the country decided it was contrary to public interest for a while, and then the banks wanted to get back into it.
Did they ever?
Yeah. No, I mean,
I don't think having a bunch of bankers, all of whom are trying to get rich, leads to good things. But I think a banker should be more like an engineer. He's more like into avoiding trouble than he is getting rich.
Yeah, and they could do fine.
They can do fine that way. And I think we made a big mistake when we create a bank where everybody who joins it plans to get rich.
Yeah.
It's a contradiction in values.
And we came to that conclusion. I don't know when Glass-Steagall was passed or anything, but then they want to get back in. How many of you know, and maybe I'm wrong on this, I haven't looked lately, but the Federal Reserve actually was given the responsibility for setting margin requirements. And they changed margin requirements a lot of times because it was known that people that borrow a lot of money cause a danger to the bank system if you get too many in the picture and all of that sort of thing. And what's happened? The banks figured out 1,000 different ways to get so you could borrow on a 100% margin, you know, and I mean, through derivatives and everything. They just totally distorted all the lessons that were learned in the '29 crash. And
Imagine taking banking into derivative trading. Who in his right mind would have allowed that?
Yeah. Well, there's more money in it.
Well, that's why they're in it.
Yeah.
But it isn't necessarily a great social outcome for the rest of us.
Well, that's what those Senate committees decided back in 1931 and 32, and then in the late 1990s, particularly. I mean, you know, very decent people, but you know, Bob Rubin and some of the people, you know, they said, this is the modern world, and here's what the modern world has turned out to hand us. And banking can have all kinds of new inventions, but it needs to have old values. And
well, if
we don't know what's going to happen, you know, because there are a lot of things that could happen out of the present situation. Depositors will not lose money. Stockholders and debt holders of the holding company and all that, they should lose money. And if people borrowed out on commercial real estate, and now the loans aren't getting extended, they should leave. It's too bad. I mean, that's part of borrowing on 100% margin, which is what people have been doing in commercial real estate. You've got to have the penalties hit the people that cause the problems, and if they took risks that they shouldn't have, it needs to fall on them if you're going to change how people are going to behave in the future. Okay, Becky?
This question comes from Davis Hance in Houston, Texas. He writes, what do you think about the business models of the big banks as compared to the regional banks in the wake of the events at Silicon Valley Bank? And how does the perceived implicit guarantee of all deposits at all banks affect big banks and those regional banks?
Yeah, well, I can say this. If you follow sound banking methods, which means not doing some things that other people do, a bank could be a perfectly decent investment. In fact, Charlie and I, well, me originally in 1969, we bought a bank at Berkshire, and we had $19 million invested in that bank, and we had $17 million, I think, invested in our insurance companies. And if the Banking Holding Company Act of 1970 hadn't been passed, we might have ended up owning a lot of banks instead of a lot of insurance companies. We were looking at more banks, and Harry Keefe was taking us around Chicago, and there were other things we could do. And then, bingo, they passed the 1970 Bank Holding Company Act, and we had to divest ourselves of that bank in in 10 years, which
By the way, it never had a bad debt.
Oh,
It never had an unnecessary cost. It made nothing but money with no risk. It never presented any deposit insurance risk to the government.
zero.
It was a lovely, sound, constructive institution in this community, and any person who really deserved credit could get credit.
And we were going to buy more banks.
We were forced out of it.
And we were going to buy more banks. And if we bought more banks, we probably wouldn't have expanded the insurance business. But, the law changed, and so we divested, and we've done okay in insurance. But banking was more attractive to us. It was bigger, and there were more targets to buy. And you could run a perfectly sound bank then, and no negotiable certificates of deposit, all these things, all the inventions that came later, and you could still run it today, and you could earn a lot. You could earn good money, very good money, and we would have found more banks, but we're precluded from doing that, and we sold bank stocks in the last. Well, we sold them first when the pandemic broke out, and then we sold some more in the last 6 months. And we don't know where the shareholders of the big banks necessarily, or the regional banks or any are heading. I've got my bank. I've got my own personal money, and I'm probably above the FDIC limit. And I've got it with a local bank, and I don't worry about it in the least. But in terms of owning banks, events will determine their future, and you've got politicians involved. You've got a whole lot of people don't really understand how the system works, and I would say that you've had something less than a perfect communication between various people and the American public. So the American public is probably as confused about banking as ever, and that has consequences. And nobody knows what the consequences are because every event starts recreating a different dynamic. I mean, in physics, you know that pi is going to be 3.14, infinite number of numbers after that. But no matter what happens, but you don't know what has happened to the stickiness of deposits at all. It got changed by 2008. It's gotten changed by this. I mean, and that changes everything. And so we're very cautious in a situation like that about ownership of banks, and we do remain with one bank holding a deal but we originated that deal, and with the Bank of America. And I like Bank of America. I like the management, and I proposed the deal to them, so I stick with it. But do I know how to project out what's going to happen from here? The answer is I don't, because I've seen so many things in the last few months which really weren't that unexpected to me to see, but which reconfirmed my belief that the American public doesn't understand our banking system, and some people in Congress perhaps don't understand it any more than I understand. I don't understand where the spaceships go. I mean, there's all kinds of things I don't know about, but if you're in Congress, you take a position on everything, and sometimes it's to your advantage, if you really understand it, not to say exactly what you feel, and here we are. Charlie, yeah.
Well, a lot has happened in banking in my lifetime. I welcomed all that early banking of the deserving immigrants by the early Bank of America. And I think all the credit cards, when they came in as original bank cards, were a great contribution to civilization. But the gamier it gets and the more it looks like investment banking, the less I like it as a citizen. I am deeply distrustful of situations in which everybody wants to get rich and envies everybody else. I regard that atmosphere as utterly toxic.
And to people who like one story, which is, again, a true story, and I'm not naming the name, and it wasn't Pete Jeffries, because he might fit this name, but it wasn't Pete. But our hero, Gene Abegg, was going to have to retire at some point. And so we hired a future replacement. It's kind of a little the problem I talked before about having the perfect business, and now we're going to bring in somebody. We actually bring in somebody that went to Central High with Charlie. Although
My class.
Yeah, and Charlie didn't know I was picking out this guy, and he wasn't.
If you'd asked me, we wouldn't have hired him.
Well, if I asked you, I probably wouldn't hire anybody, but that's another question. But this guy comes over, a perfectly decent guy, but presentable, looks like a banker and everything. And of course, the first thing he wants to do, we've got this wonderful bank, but we got the crummiest looking building in Rockford. And we don't need a great building, we just need a great banker. And naturally, this guy wants to build a new building. And because we were the most profitable bank, but we didn't look like we were the most profitable bank. And so I told him he could have any building he wanted as long as it was not higher than, it had to be shorter than our nearest competitor. And he lost interest totally. He wanted to be on the top floor of the biggest building in town. And I told him he could horizontally do anything he wanted, but he couldn't do it vertically. And it taught me a lot about the guy's motivations in life, and he didn't end up running the bank anyway. Anyway, that's all I know about banking, probably more. Station 3.
Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. Hi.
Hi.
My name is Daphne. I'm 13 years old, and this is my 6th annual Berkshire Hathaway shareholders meeting. And I've had the privilege to ask you both questions in years past. My question for you today is the following. As you know, the U.S. national debt is currently at an estimated $31 trillion, making up about 125% of the U.S. GDP. In the meantime, over the past few years, the Federal Reserve has telegraphed that they intend to monetize the debt by printing trillions of dollars, even as they insist that they're fighting inflation. Already, other major economies in the world, such as China, Saudi Arabia, and Brazil, are moving away from the dollar in anticipation of this. My question is, are we likely to face a time in the future when the US dollar is no longer the global reserve currency? How is Berkshire prepared for this possibility? And what can we do as American citizens to attempt to shelter ourselves from what's beginning to look like the beginnings of de-dollarization?
Well, I should ask you to come up here and answer some questions. I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, we are the reserve currency, and I see no option for any other currency to be the reserve currency. And I think that nobody understands the situation better than Jay Powell. But he's not in control of fiscal policy, and every now and then he drops a few hints. And there was no question that when the pandemic broke out, I mean, it was a semi-war-like situation, but nobody knows how far you can go with the paper currency before it gets out of control, and particularly if you're the world's reserve currency. Nobody knows the answer to that. And you don't want to try and pick out the point at where it does become a problem, because then it's all over. I think we should be very careful. I mean, we all learned Keynesianism, and we applied it in World War II to the advantage of the country, and we did everything we could to prevent inflation during the war. And then the war ended in August of '45, and I think in January '46, and I'm not giving you exact figures at all now, but in January '46, I think the rate of inflation was at something like 1% or thereabouts. And by the end of the year, I think it was at like 15%. And again, I'm doing this from long memories. But it's easy for America to do a lot. But if we do too much, it's very hard to see how you recover once you let the genie out of the bottle and people lose faith in the currency. And they behave in an entirely different manner than they do when they feel that if they put some money in the bank or have a pension plan or whatever it may be, that they're going to get out something with roughly equal purchasing power. And it just changes the economy, and all kinds of things can happen then. And I can't predict them, and nobody else can predict them, but I do know they aren't good. And we will see. And I do this as I voted for both parties, and it's not limited to politicians of either party or anything of the sort. People take positions. Some of them understand what they're doing. Some of them don't understand what they're doing. If they put me on some medical board, I don't understand what I'm doing. It's not that there's nothing wrong with the fact that you can't master everything. You can't all be Isaac Newton, but you can't go around pretending you do or making decisions on it. And we are not as well off in relation to curbing inflation expectations, which become self-fulfilling, and we are not as well off as we were earlier. And Berkshire is better prepared than most investments for that kind of a period. But I said this in the annual report, but we aren't perfectly prepared because there's no way to perfectly prepare. You don't know what course of action will occur. And it's a very political decision now. It's a tribal decision to some degree. And you hope for leadership that actually will do something, recognizes the problem. And America's an incredible society, rich. We got everything going for us, but that doesn't mean we can just print money indefinitely as debt. And it'll be interesting to see how it turns out. Charlie?
Well, at some point, printing money to buy votes will be counterproductive.
Yep.
And we don't know exactly where that comes. And if something is going to be dangerous and unproductive, you ought to keep it a fair distance away. Now, if you have a culture that is exceptionally strong, like Japan, they have done some strange things there.
But they couldn't have been the reserve currency.
No, of course not. But Japan bought back most of the national debt and a lot of the common stocks, and debt. Just the Federal Reserve owns practically everything in Japan, and the country's working. It's had 30 years of economic stasis, but it's not going to hell. I really admire Japan, but I don't think we should try and imitate it. I don't think we're as good as Japan at taking.
They have a cohesive culture, and we don't, Charlie.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
In Japan, everybody's supposed to suck it up and cope, and in America, we complain.
So I hope you come next year with a tougher question. And thank you. And I predict I would love to be being born again today in the United States. I mean, we can do a lot of dumb things and get away with it. We can't do an unlimited number. There are people who care about that, and you have to be willing to be extraordinarily unpopular. I mean, Paul Volcker. There are other Federal Reserve chair people that would not have done what he did. It's just it's too uncomfortable. And there used to be a politician in Nebraska, and if you asked him some really tough question like, how do you stand on abortion, or he would look you right in the eye and he'd say, I'm all right on that one, and then he moved next. Well, that's what people have done, basically on inflation, and one way or another, they say I'm all right on that, and then they don't really think about what the consequences of their actions could be, particularly. And it's so much fun if there's 435 of you, to just be one of 435 instead of being the person actually responsible. Anyway, I am still, next to the question of two superpowers, and when you get into really destroying a planet, destroying the reserve currency of the world when there's really no substitute, and forget about all the toys, I mean, it's a joke to think of any tokens or that sort of that's madness. But it's also madness to just keep printing money. Yeah, and we know how to do it, and we actually came from a money printing economy in World War II, which was required, and we suffered significant inflation. The price level, I mean, there's a million ways to judge it, but it's maybe 10 times what it was then, or something like that. Well, that's getting close to the edge of where you don't want to hold dollars anymore. You want to hold something else. You want to hold real estate. You want to hold an interest in a business. There's a lot of good. Your best defense is your own earning power. If you're the best doctor in town, if you're the best lawyer in town, if you're the best teacher in town, or even if you're the 10th best, you're going to make a good living. I mean, the economy is productive, and you will succeed with your talents, but you won't succeed by hoarding dollars. You'll just succeed by the fact that your value to the community, which is a rich community overall, is sustained. And so the best investment is always in yourself. That's the answer I would give you.
Well, we have a situation where we've learned to print money in gobs and let a big chunk of our young people go right into wealth management. This is
like we did.
Yeah, like we did. Yes, we've been bad examples. And I want to say that I didn't realize wealth management was going to get so big when I went into it. And I want to apologize for what's happened.
Yeah, well, anyway, you did well. Becky.
This question comes from Gary Gambino in Parma, Ohio, who says he's been a Berkshire shareholder since 2004. He says the amount paid this year for the 41.4% stake in Pilot values the entire company at around $19 billion. That's about 6 times what BP is paying for Travel Centers of America, but Pilot's market share is just 3 times Travel Centers of America's. Was it a big mistake to base the final price on 2022 earnings, which has unusually high fuel margins?
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question, and the answer is that we arranged to buy it in 3 stages, with the third stage being at the option of the owner of 20%. The first stage, we bought at what turned out to be a very attractive price. The second stage turned out to be a very good year for the diesel business, which means that the seller got a very good price. And I would say that overall, we feel very good about the fact we own the 80% at the price that we do, but we would have rather owned, better if we just bought the 80% to start with. And the last 20%, the seller has the option, and that's always an unintelligent way of structuring something. We've had that arrangement with other, well, we had it with the Furniture Mart. We bought 80% of the Furniture Mart on August 30th, 1983, almost 40 years ago, and it's worked out perfectly. But when you give the other person the option, they've got some advantage. We have 80% now of a business we like very much, and the comparison to Travel America is really spurious, because Travel America is not only much smaller, but they run all their properties. We have hundreds and hundreds of locations on the interstate that are zoned for what we commercial, and maybe 15 acres or 12. There's nothing like it, and they're not going to move the interstate 2 miles to the right or something, or anything of the sort. So we've got a position that travel. I mean, BP may or may not have made a fine deal. I've read the prospectus. And I can understand. I mean, it's a big source of output for BP. But I like the management we have had at Pilot. I like very much the fellow who's coming in. That's the new CEO. I just have to tell you a little bit about Adam Wright, who's taking that job on. He came from Omaha. He wasn't selected because he came from Omaha. He came from Omaha. He came from North High, a public school that my wife graduated from. I've got grandchildren that graduated from there. He went to the University of Nebraska and almost set the rushing record in football, which will never be beaten because they've given up football. But I think he rushed for maybe 3,600 yards. He held 3 jobs while he went through there. He interned at Mid-America 20 years ago. His mother worked to put him through school. I mean, it's Horatio Alger squared, and we have him to manage Pilot. And the Haslams have given us a wonderful business. Big Jim, and my vintage. I mean, great people. And here we are. And I'm very glad we own Pilot. I just wish we bought 100% of it when I first made the deal, but that was not the deal.
Warner wasn't for sale.
It wasn't for sale. Yeah. And incidentally, the last 20% of the Furniture Mart wasn't for sale when we bought it, so we bought 80% of it, and that's worked out well. And we've done various deals various ways. The best way to do it is just write people a check and get the stock. But we did that with TTI, but you can't always make the same deal. If we like the business well enough and the people well enough, we will tailor it differently. But our preference is to write a check and own the whole place and keep the management in place. Got anything to add on it?
No.
Yeah, I hope. It's really wonderful to watch something like Adam Wright work. I mean, basically, I don't know what his mother was earning, but he went to North High, which is probably 4 or 5 miles from here, public school graduate, and worked his way up. Went for a short period to Pacific Gas and Electric, and we brought him home to run Pilot. And Pilot, the prices on diesel were way different last year. Pilot is close to $80 billion of sales last year, but more normal prices, it's significant, and it's half that or thereabouts, maybe a little more. But he is, I don't know how old Adam would be, but he's in his 40s, and he came up through the organization that Greg Abel was involved with, and now here he is running a very major business. And it's good at Berkshire to be able to do that, and I don't, somebody else may have gone to more prestigious business schools or anything. So what? We've seen what Adam can do. Okay, station 4.
Good afternoon, Mr. Buffett, Mr. Munger. My name is JC. I'm 15 years old, and I'm from Ohio. This is my 4th in-person Berkshire meeting. I have a lot of passion learning from your speeches, interviews, and articles. Thank you for sharing your wisdom all the time. Mr. Buffett, in your annual shareholder letter this year, you said that Berkshire's journey consisted of continuous savings, the power of compounding, the American tailwind, and avoidance of major mistakes. You have humbly admitted in the past that you have made many mistakes, but this is the first time that major mistakes stood out to me. Could you please advise us on what major mistakes we should avoid in both investing and in life? I would also like to have Mr. Munger's thoughts too, please. Thank you very much.
Well, Charlie said the major mistake you can make, then you're lucky if you're in the United States. you go around the world, you don't have a lot of choices in some places, but you should write your obituary and then try and figure out how to live up to it. That's something you get wiser on as you go along. The business mistakes, you just want to make sure you don't make any mistakes that take you out of the game or come close to taking you out of your game. You should never have a night when you're worried about investing. I mean, assuming you have any money to invest at all, and you should spend a little bit less than you earn, and you can spend a little bit more than you earn, and then you've got debt, and the chances are you'll never get out of debt. I'll make an exception in terms of a mortgage on your house, but credit card debt, we're in the credit card business big time, and the world will stay in the credit card business. But why get behind the game? And if you're effectively paying 12 or 14 or whatever percent you're paying on a credit card, you're saying I'm going to earn more than 12 or 14% of money, and if you can do that, come to Berkshire Hathaway. So it's I hate to say this when Charlie's around me, but it's straight out of Ben Franklin. I mean, and it's not that complicated, but I'll give you a couple lessons. Tom Murphy, the first time I met him, said two things to me. He said, you can always tell someone to go to hell tomorrow. Well, that was great advice then, and think of what great advice it is when you sit down at a computer and screw your life up forever by telling somebody to go to hell or something else in 30 seconds and you can't erase it. And you haven't lost the option. And he said, praise by name, criticize by category. Well, what makes more sense than that? I mean, who do you like that criticizes you all the time? And you don't need to vilify anybody to make your point on subjects of discussion. And then I'll give you another general piece of advice. I've never known anybody that was basically kind that died without friends. And I've known plenty of people with money that have died without friends, including their family. But I've never known anybody. I've seen a few people, including Tom Murphy Sr., and maybe Junior, who's here, but certainly his dad. I never saw him. I watched him for 50 years. I never saw him do an unkind act. I didn't see him do very many stupid acts either. I mean, it wasn't that he was non-discriminating. He just decided that there was no reason to do it. And wow, what a difference that makes in life. Charlie?
Well, it's so simple to spend less than you earn and invest shrewdly and avoid toxic people and toxic activities and try and keep learning all your life, et cetera, and do a lot of deferred gratification because you prefer life that way. And if you do all those things, you are almost certain to succeed. And if you don't, you're going to need a lot of luck. And you don't want to need a lot of luck. You want to go into a game where you're very likely to win without having any unusual luck.
I'd add one more thought, too. You need to know how people can manipulate other people, and you need to resist the temptation to do it yourself.
Oh, yes. The toxic people who are trying to fool you or lie to you, who aren't reliable in meeting their commitments. The great lesson of life is get them the hell out of your life.
Yeah.
And do it fast. Do it fast.
And I would add, Charlie would totally agree with me, do it tactfully if possible, too. But do get them out of your life.
Yes, yeah, I don't mind a little tact. Or even a little financial cost, but the question is getting them the hell out of the life.
Okay, Becky?
All right, this comes from Roger Lee Tan. He says, my name is Roger from Hong Kong, a long-term shareholder of Berkshire, admirer and follower of Mr. Buffett's and Munger's wisdom and principle. Both of you have said before that the most difficult problems in life are always people problems, and one of the key lessons you have learned to be able to live a happy life and a successful life is to stay away from negative people. My question is, what to do if those negative people are your families, the people whom you can't simply stay away from?
Yeah. You minimize it. But you can't, there's no question about it. And Charlie gave an answer I thought was a master of tact the other day when he says you always ought to interact with people who behave well. He says, of course, you have to make some exceptions in your family. But but it's true. And, you really, I don't know what it's like to have, a drunken, bullyish, probably father, but parent just generally. How do you handle it? It's very interesting that the MacArthur family, the very famous John MacArthur, the man who set up the MacArthur Foundation, he had 5 kids, and 4 of them turned out to be superstars of one sort or another, and they had this crazy itinerant drunken father, but they all decided that the thing to do was get the hell out of the house. So you had the father of the MacArthur Foundation that did that along with 3 of the siblings out of 5. So, I was lucky. Charlie was lucky. If you have our father saw plenty of shortcomings in both of us, but it would still be there for us. And if you have one that won't be there for you, it's a very tough problem. And I think one way or another, I probably would have gotten through that if I had that situation. But I think my life would have been a lot different. Charlie?
I have nothing to add. We're
Okay, station 5.
Hey, Warren and Charlie. Good afternoon. My name is Sudhakar Reddy Annap Reddy. I'm from Bentonville, Arkansas, home of Walmart. I'm shareholder since 2019, and my daughters are shareholders since 2020. My question is, this is my first time coming to shareholders, and my question is, Walmart and Berkshire Hathaway has very great relationship with BNSF, McLean, and consumer goods like Fruit of the Looms and Granimals, and etc. My question is, Granimals is exclusively sold at Walmart, and Fruit of the Loom is sold at many other retailers. How does Berkshire Hathaway decides some items are sold at some retailers exclusively versus others are sold at many retailers?
Well, that's a good question, but obviously you'd love to control, if you have a product, you'd love to control the distribution, and you're probably going to get better gross margins if they ask for you by name. They just had an article about Bernardo Arnault, who built LVMH, and he's got a blue box at Tiffany, and the blue box itself means something, and Coca-Cola, the bottle, meant something. In the 1920s, I think there was a study of that kind of hoop skirt bottle, and blindfolded, a very high percentage of the population could recognize it was Coca-Cola. When they can recognize not only the product but the container, you're going to have good gross margins. And if you're just another cola, and there have been hundreds of them, and even if you have distribution through something like Walmart, who has Sam's Cola, it just doesn't, it's not the same. Here I am, and 1886 or so, John Pemberton in Atlanta created it, and they spent a very significant amount of money advertising. On the other hand, Hershey's didn't spend any money on advertising. So we have observed, Charlie and I both have observed so many products, so many methods of retail. And we really think we know quite a bit about it, and we also know how much we don't know about it at the same time. And it doesn't mean that we want to go into retailing ourselves, but it does mean we've learned to some extent what to avoid. And we've learned when somebody really has something, and Granimals has something, it's just that there's only many, Walmart does a great job of distribution for us, and it's a good product for Walmart, it's a good product for us. And on Fruit of the Loom, they can sell lots of types of underwear, and they can do a big volume, but we're not going to make as much money relatively to capital employed or anything with a product that has a whole bunch of competitors. And if the kid wants a Granimals pajamas or something, it's not the sort of product that causes people to drive 20 miles out of their way to buy it or anything of the sort. But if you're in the Walmart and you're picking out pajamas or something for the kid, and he or she wants a particular product, and it's reasonably priced and everything, and wears well and everything, we're happy to have it distributed through somebody with the distribution power of Walmart and their design. They're very happy to have the product. On balance, it's obviously better if you own See's Candy than if you own the no-name candy company. Particularly when people buy it as gifts a couple times a year. I mean, they know that if they give their girlfriend, if they give someone in the hospital, if they give a gift at Christmas or going to a dinner, they know if they hand a box of candy to somebody, they don't say at the same time, "Here, I got a wonderful deal on this candy." I mean, it just kills the moment, right? What they really want to see is a smile on the other person's face that they're receiving it, and they get it. So, knowing what customer, and See's box chocolates, are not remotely the market that soft drinks are, and the product does not travel particularly. Hershey's chocolate didn't travel. I mean, if you look at candy bars, what's popular in the UK isn't that popular in the US, and all kinds of things. Coca-Cola travels. There's 200 countries, and roughly, and probably 180 of them, it's the dominant product. And how do you do it? Well, it helps if you started in 1886 and build from that point forward. So we've learned a lot. We got a lot to learn, but we did learn that something like Granimals, we understood. When it came around, nobody ever heard of it. We bought it for a very low price, as it turned out, 20 years ago, and still nobody knows that hardly that we own it, and that's fine. But they know what Granimals are, and it has legs. It just keeps going year after year, and some things are like pet rocks, and we're learning all the time. Charlie?
I have nothing to add.
Okay. You probably never bought any Granimals.
No, I never have. I don't even wear them.
You wouldn't fit. Okay, Becky.
This question comes from Barry Laffer in New York City. Berkshire owns about 94 million shares of Paramount Global as of the last published data. This asset-rich company has disappointed on recent quarterly earnings reports and just this week slashed its dividend by 80%. How do you see the streaming wars evolving, and do you still have conviction in your investment thesis? Is your investment thesis based on the company being an acquisition target or based on its fundamentals?
Yeah, and how would you like to manage my money for nothing? We are not in the business of giving stock advice to people, and people who don't know anything about stocks can make a lot of money doing that, and we don't think it's something we should give away. But I will say this, it's not good news when any company passes its dividend, or cuts its dividend dramatically. And the streaming business is extremely interesting to watch because there's people love to use their eyeballs watching, being entertained on a screen in front of them or a phone or whatever it may be. But there's a lot of companies doing it, and you need fewer companies or you need higher prices. Well, you need higher prices or it doesn't work. And you don't lock in people when you get them to join up for the streaming period when your serial runs. I mean, you keep them on for a while, but you can't lock them up. And we'll see what happens. I mean, I had a gasoline station when I was 21 or 22, and it's about 4 or 5 miles from here, and we had one competitor, and he determined our profit because we looked at his price every day, and if we cut the price, he'd match it, and we couldn't raise the price, and he did twice the gallonage, so he won. And there's just basic business problems that you see with certain industries that you don't see with the other. Disney was unique in its animated, what it offered, in the 30s and 40s, and they wrote the stuff off in the first showing, and then they rejuvenated Snow White and put all these other people every 7 years, and that was fine. But this is a different world, and the eyeballs aren't going to increase dramatically, and the time they can spend is not going to increase dramatically, and you got a bunch of companies that don't want to quit, and who knows what pricing does under that. But anybody tells you what they know what pricing will do in the future is kidding themselves. Charlie? Charlie's had a lot of experience, incidentally, with Hollywood. I mean, he used to, before I even met him.
I think the movie business is one tough business.
Yeah.
That's my view.
The talent will make the money, the agents will make the money, and if you've got a theater, the theaters are now doing 70% of the business that they did before the pandemic. And big hits, have enormous grosses, but you can't reduce the supply. People have only got so many hours in the day. They've only got 2 eyeballs, and they got more choice than ever before. And they've got stuff that's cheaper that offers them the same experience, and some of them like the experience, particularly the big hits of going. But it isn't like you can double the number of people or double the eyeballs or anything like that. And you've got a lot of people. The talent will always get paid. And when you essentially are packaging that talent one way or another, and you need to get higher prices, and you've got a lot of strong companies that don't want to quit, that's an interesting equation.
Hey, if you think the movies are tough, try to invest in a New York show on a conventional stage. There they think it's a breach of faith in that business to let the person who put up the money ever get any money back.
Yeah, well, Charlie saw a lot of that, actually.
I don't like those businesses.
Tell him what happened on Cleopatra, Charlie. It's a business that everybody's tempted to go. They love the idea of going in it, and they get a certain amount of psychic income. But
I never owned any racehorses either.
Well, my father-in-law and I used to talk about claiming a horse at Exarban, but we never quite got around to it. We had a lot of fun going to the track together. Okay, section 6.
Good afternoon. My name is Hannah Hayes, and I'm a high schooler from Iowa. You said earlier today that transitioning to renewable energy has the people and capital to support it. So with enough investment in renewables, the development of energy storage technology to soon meet Iowa's energy needs, and support from the government system through Inflation Reduction Act funding, why hasn't Berkshire Hathaway Energy truly invested in the future by accelerating retirement plans for the coal plants, which have high operating costs and are currently Iowa's biggest carbon polluter and will continue to be until they're finally retired in 2049, which is too late to be curbing emissions, according to the IPCC.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We in Iowa, we have actually produced more wind energy than is used, the total amount of energy used by our customers, but it's not producible 24 hours a day necessarily. So there's problems. And incidentally, in Iowa, a significant majority of counties welcome us when we come around and want to put in wind, and some don't want it. I mean, there's a not in my backyard someplace. There's other places where they love the money they get from a small plot of ground, and people they like the taxes that are paid. But I would say that if there's one state in the union that stands out in the development, it's Iowa. But what's also interesting in Iowa is that we have one other major company. There's always loads of little co-ops and all kinds of things that sell electricity, but we have one major competitor, and our prices are significantly lower. And as a matter of fact, we are now in the Omaha Public Power District, and 3 miles or 4 miles away, we're selling electricity in Iowa, and we are selling it cheaper, even though public power was invented in Nebraska and has been I think it's, George Norris did it back in the 1930s, and it's Nebraska's resisted to some extent wind power more than Iowa, but like I say, our competitor or alternate source hasn't really pursued it the way we have. But I would say that our record in wind and solar has not been topped by any utility in the United States. And of course, it's been aided by the fact that most utilities pay out 70 or 80% of earnings in dividends. And we haven't taken a common dividend out of, we had a little tiny preferred, we haven't taken a common dividend out of it. For 20 years, we reinvested, I don't know how many billion. That's the reason why the earnings have gone from $200 million to $4 billion, but we're not earning a higher rate of return on capital than we were when we started. We just put way more capital into the business as we went along, kept reinvesting the capital. So I wish Greg were here to tell you more details about it, but I would say that we'd really put up Berkshire Hathaway Energy's record against any utility in the United States. Charlie, you watched it.
Well, I have, and I'm not personally at all sure how bad the global warming is going to be. I don't think anybody knows for sure whether the seas are going to rise 2 inches or 20 feet. And so I think there's a lot of false claims here in a world where much is not known.
Yeah, Wyoming, there is a lot of wind in Wyoming, and we are building transmission line to extend out through the West. But it was World War II, and they told us to do it. And we had a czar in Washington that could say, just get it done. Like they said to Henry Kaiser on building ships. You can't believe how far ahead we would be now from where we are. But we've got the money. We've got the know-how. And we do spend about, this year, our depreciation in our utility company is on the order of $4 billion. And we spend maybe $3 billion additional to that. So maybe we spend $7 billion. And there are very few companies in the utility industry that are spending, that percentage of their depreciation. But we'd love to be spending more. But there are people all over that don't want the pipeline to go through there, or they don't want the tower, whatever it may be. And that is the problem of a democracy. And even, as I mentioned, within Iowa, you've got a great many counties that, great majority of the counties, I think, but welcome the wind power, and you've got some counties that don't like it. And we're obviously going to work with the ones that want to work with us. We do not have the ability to go in and tell anybody what to do on that. And there's a Public Utility Commission in every state that basically governs what we earn on it, what we do, and that's the way the industry is developed. And that's not bad, unless you get into things that in effect, extend. They're part of a countrywide system rather than a statewide system.
I think also that even if we weren't worried about global warming, it would make sense to shift to renewables to conserve our hydrocarbons. There's certain things hydrocarbons can do that nothing else can do, and there are only so much of them there. Why not be cautious in conserving them?
And the cost, they've gotten so much more efficient too. I mean, the wind stuff. I mean, if you look at what we're doing now, those towers are way more efficient. But there's a lot of people that are talking that they're talking about things that can't be done, and then
there's a lot of nonsense in this field.
Yeah.
If you like nonsense, this is the field for you.
No. Well, we're in the field, so
I know.
Okay, Becky.
This is a question from Monroe Richardson. The Wall Street Journal reported in March that oil producers are producing less oil and may have reached their peak in the Permian Basin. Given the major positions of both Occidental Petroleum and Chevron in the Permian, would you please explain the rationale for Berkshire's significant holdings of both those companies, considering that future outlook for oil there?
Well, there's no question. It's really interesting about oil, and Charlie knows way more about oil than I do. When did you buy that royalty in near Bakersfield or wherever it is? But that was before I met you, right?
Yes. No, it wasn't before. Yes, it was. It was just before. You're right.
Yeah.
And that goddamn royalty is still paying me $70,000 a year.
And what'd you pay for the?
$1,000.
Yeah. Now that's the opposite of the Permian. My dad bought $1,000 or $1,500 worth of royalties before he died in 1964. He left them to my mother. My mother left them to her two daughters, and my older sister died, and my younger sister's here today, and she gets these checks every month, and she knows about all these different fields and what they're producing, and that's the reality of half of the oil production, or something around that, in the United States, and then the other half is shale. And if you've gone to the movies and ever watched oil, you've never watched the things that are pumping out Charlie's royalties in California. You see these gushers of oil. Well, in the Permian, and I'm like, this should sink in on you. And the first day when you bring in a well, it may be 12,000 barrels, it may be 15,000 barrels, and it's dangerous. Occidental had one come into, I think, 19,000 barrels or something like that one day, and in a year and a half, it becomes practically nothing. It's a different business, in effect. And the United States, it's interesting. We use whatever we use, maybe 11 and a fraction. Well, we produce 11 and a fraction million barrels of oil equivalent a day. But if shale stopped, I mean, it would drop to 6 million very fast. Well, just imagine taking 5 million barrels a day out of the production in the world, and then we're also taking down our strategic petroleum reserve Strategic Petroleum Reserve is the ultimate oil field. You don't have to drill. It's just that we've got it. And it was supposed to be strategic, but it gets involved in politics. And so when you talk about the oil business, you're talking about different kinds of businesses, basically. And we like Occidental's position in the Permian, and we wouldn't like that position at, well, it got to minus. One day it got to minus $30 a barrel. That was crazy, of course. But if oil sells at X, you do very well, and if it sells at half of X, your costs are the same, and it doesn't change the production, and it doesn't work as well, but it also brings down the oil production of the United States very fast. So we don't know what oil prices will be, but we do very much like the Occidental position they have, and that's why we financed them a few years ago, and it looked like it was a terrible mistake when the oil market just totally collapsed, and then it changed around, and we bought a lot of the common stock. In the last few months, they've reduced our preferred, which we don't like, obviously. I mean, we'd be disappointed in them if they didn't reduce it. It's intelligent from their standpoint. So we've taken, of the $10 billion preferred, we've gotten maybe $400 or $500 million of it retired at 110% of par. But Becky Holub she's an extraordinary manager of Occidental. Her first job was with City Service. That was the first stock I bought in 1942. She knows what happens beneath the surface. I know the math of it, but I wouldn't have the faintest idea what to do if I was in an oil field. I mean, I can dig 2 feet down. I can't in my backyard, and that's my understanding of subsoil in the world. I can't picture the field that Charlie has been collecting that monthly check from 50 plus years, 60, 60 years roughly. Or my sister getting at various fields where they just keep pumping and pumping and pumping. And we in the United States are lucky to have the ability to produce the kind of oil we've got from shale, but it is not a long-term source like you might think by watching movies about oil or something of the sort. Charlie, do you have anything?
Yeah, it really dies fast, those shale wells. If you like quick death in your oil wells, we have them for you.
No. But Occidental, they're doing a lot of good things.
Yeah, they do a lot of new wells, and they're doing it at a profit, but it's a different kind of oil business.
It's just different, yeah. And that's true of almost half the oil produced in the United States. And there's
a lot of oil down there that nobody knows how to produce. And they've been working at it for like 50 years. But they worked at the existing shale production for about 50 years before they figured it out. And it was weirdly complicated when they finally were able to do it. There's only one type of sand that works.
Can you imagine a horizontal pipe, that maybe 1.5 miles or something? It's just so different than what you think about.
It goes laterally for 3 miles, 2 miles down.
Yeah.
How in the hell do you drill 2 or 3 miles laterally when you're already 2 or 3 miles under the earth? They've mastered a lot of very tricky technology to be able to get any oil out of these wells at all.
Yeah. And we love the position with Occidental, and we love having Vicki run it, and they've been.
And there's a lot more oil down there if anybody can figure out another magic trick. That's all we need is another magic trick.
But Occidental has some other things too.
Yes,
but the price of oil still is incredibly important in terms of the economics of short-lived oil. I mean, no question about that.
Well, if it's...
And we will, incidentally, there's speculation about us buying control. We're not going to buy control. We don't want to. We've got the right management running it. I mean, we wouldn't know what to do with it. Charlie wouldn't mind knowing what to do in an oil field.
Admitting you're buying coal would be like going out and seeking to acquire a cancer or something. You can't even borrow to expand a coal mine now. It's really, it got very unfashionable.
Yeah. And we think, frankly, some of the things said are ridiculous, and on both sides, on both in both extremes. I mean, it's just, I mean, you're dealing with physics. You're dealing with, it's the politicization of positions on something that's enormously important in terms of energy. Is just, it just lends itself to demagogues and fundraisers and advisory organizations and everybody in sight. And we will make rational decisions, and we do not think it's un-American to be producing oil.
And there is no oil basin in the United States that compares to the Permian in terms of promise.
Yeah, we were lucky.
Well,
we didn't know it was there until not that many years ago.
It had sort of been used up, and they always knew the shale oil was there, but they thought it was going to stay unrecoverable forever.
Yeah. The second or third stock I bought was Texas Pacific Land Trust, and they owned 3 million acres down there in P, and they were grazing revenues of $10,000 a year or something like that. And they were sitting on this incredible amount of oil, and basically that company is now actually part of Chevron, and it went through Texaco and did all kinds of things, and there's still a Texas Pacific Land Trust, but a lot of that property is fee owned by their minerals are owned by Chevron, which is some advantage, but it's it's an interesting subject, I'll put it that way, and we will not be making any offer for control of Occidental, but we love the shares we have, and we may or may not own more in the future, but we certainly have warrants on which we got as part of the original deal on a very substantial amount of stock at around $59 a share, and those warrants last a long time, and I'm glad we have them. Okay, station 7.
My name is Max Joel. I'm from Toronto, Canada. I have a question for Charlie regarding a statement you made in the past. You once mentioned that you would prefer to hire someone with IQ of 130 who believes it's 120 over someone with IQ of 150 who thinks it's 170. I understand that you are referring to Elon Musk. Given the recent success of his ventures, such as Tesla, SpaceX, and Starlink, I'm curious to know if you still hold the view that Elon Musk overestimates himself. Thank you so much.
Well, yes, I think Elon Musk overestimates himself, but he is very talented, so he's overestimating somebody who doesn't need to overestimate to be very talented.
There's a Bill Maher program, about a week old, maybe 2 weeks old, but he interviews Elon, and Elon does a terrific job toe-to-toe with Bill Maher, who it's worth watching. And Elon he's a brilliant guy, and I would say that he might score over 170, but he he dreams about things, and his dreams have got a foundation.
He would not have achieved what he has in life if he hadn't tried for unreasonably extreme objectives. He likes taking on the impossible job and doing it. We're different. Warren and I are looking for the easy job that we can identify.
Yeah. If we can do it playing tic-tac-toe, we'll do it, you know. I mean,
we have a wholly different way of going
the whole way. Yeah. But we don't want to compete with Elon in a lot of things. I mean,
we don't want that much failure.
Yeah. Yeah, and it takes over your life, and I mean, in a way that it just doesn't fit us. But you know, there are going to be, well, there have been important things done by Elon already, and it requires, fanaticism isn't the word.
Yeah, it is the word.
Okay. Well, it isn't quite the word, but it's a dedication to solving the impossible, and every now and then they'll do it, but it would be torturous to me or Charlie, and I like the way I'm living, and I wouldn't enjoy being in his, but he wouldn't enjoy being in my shoes either. What's the Bill Maher interview? Okay, Becky.
This question comes from Foster Taylor. At the 2010 Berkshire annual meeting, you said the one question that you would ask of the Berkshire CEO would be about the distribution of cash to shareholders as the Berkshire cash pile grows larger and larger. So let me ask that question. Do you still feel confident of the future prospects for our over $100 billion in cash on hand, or are we getting closer to cash distributions?
Well, the one thing, if Berkshire shares are selling for less than we think they're worth, that could be a pretty big way to distribute cash. But what we'd really like to do is buy great businesses. If we could buy a company for $50 billion or $75 billion, $100 billion, we could do it. And we can do it, and our word's good. It's difficult with a public company because, in effect, if you bid on a company, you make the bid, and their shareholders vote months later, and you're giving an option. If we're good for it, and the other guy has a way to top you, or all kinds of things, they can get out of it, and you get paid 2% for that or 1% for that. That is not an appropriate price. And on the other hand, Delaware will decide whether they should do it or not, and that's the way the world is. I mean, that's the law. So it'd be easier to do with a private company, and there aren't very many that are big. On the other hand, there's nobody else that can quite make a deal like we can under the right circumstances. And there could be a situation where a number of very decent companies have got a very uncomfortable borrowing structure, and money comes due to them at the exact wrong time, and that's when they pick up a phone, as did Tiffany and Harley Davidson and you name it. I mean, a whole bunch of companies in 2008. That sort of thing will happen again, whether it results in us getting the calls or what the world is exactly at that time. But the one thing we know is that the number of phone calls that you can make at a time like that is very, very limited. And there can be good companies. They don't want to sell the company necessarily, but they just may need $5 or $10 or $20 billion, depending on what company you're talking about. And that can happen, and our own shareholders can be selling the stock too cheap, and we'll never do anything to make them sell it cheap, and we'll tell them the truth about what the business is. But if market circumstances result in us being able to buy in $50 billion of our own stock, we'll buy it. So we'll see what the world holds. But we don't have the opportunities we used to have, but we've got enough, and we're making money with the things we have. It isn't killing us to hold 130 billion of bills at 5% plus bond equivalent yields. And everybody says, well, yields are going to go down in the future. I don't have the faintest idea what yields are going to do in the future. And, the prime rate was 21.5% in 1981 or 2, and people were worried that it was going to go totally spin out of control. And Volcker kept it from happening. But if Volcker hadn't been in there, who the hell knows what would have happened. So we're running Berkshire so that we'll do okay, and maybe we'll do a little bit better than okay. Charlie?
Okay, maybe fine.
Okay, station 8.
Hello, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. My name is Carlos Sanchez, and I'm honored to be here from Guadalajara, Mexico. Mr. Munger, as a fellow lawyer, I have a question regarding corporate law. Considering your experience and success, if you were to offer guidance to someone like Ralph Tortorella when he was at the beginning of his career and before becoming Berkshire Hathaway Company's lawyer, what key principles or lessons would you suggest to help him excel in his profession?
Well, I'm not sure I quite caught all of that, but
yeah,
I don't think I have a lot of advice about how to succeed as a lawyer. I have a son-in-law who describes modern law practice in a big firm. He says, it's like a pie eating contest where if you win, you get to eat more pie. And I advise you to avoid that kind of a law firm. Life is too short to just do nothing but eat pie.
Yeah, Charlie has not practiced law since, what, 1964 maybe, or whatever it was, but
1962.
62. And Charlie has given me 4 or 5 pieces of advice that don't really come from his legal background, but because he knows the system so well and really did do quite well at Harvard Law School despite his taunting of teachers and a few things. He has given me 4 or 5 solutions on things that nobody else in the world would have given me, law firm or otherwise. And it's been within almost a nanosecond of when I described a problem to him, and he just gave me the answer that nobody else would have come up with. And I told you one of them last year, so I won't repeat it at this meeting. But we've got the best lawyer in the world, and Charlie, if it's something that really matters. There have been times when I've taken advantage of that. And Charlie didn't want to be a lawyer. He didn't want to sell his time, maybe at $20 an hour or something, to people he thought were making the wrong decisions, and he knew more about it than they did. And that just did not strike him as a good way to go through life, and I think he's probably right on that. I think he'd have really gotten to be miserable if he had to keep doing that. It's just no fun. It'd be like me giving investment advice to somebody or taking it from somebody. I just wouldn't want to do it in life. And Charlie figured that out, and so we decided to work for ourselves, and this work's been happily ever after.
We have no complaints.
Yeah, none. Okay, we're at Becky.
This question comes from Ryan Harding, and it's about the new 15% corporate minimum tax rate. As he sees it, its implementation is currently understood. He thinks it, as he understands it, to apply over rolling 3-year periods and to be based on reported earnings. First, does the inclusion of unrealized gains and losses in reported earnings under the current financial reporting standards contribute to the calculation for corporate minimum tax rate purposes? And could it potentially convert some of those notional deferred taxes into cash taxes? even if a rise in the market price of a major holding is only temporary, but rather extreme? And then second, could it reduce the effect of some of the renewable energy tax incentives and others?
Yeah. I think the answer on the second part probably is no, but I don't want to say it is for sure, because he's asking the same questions I ask of Mark Hamburg, who's the smartest guy on combining understanding of business, understanding the tax code, understanding SEC rules and everything else that you'll find in corporate America. And these questions, the particular question on marketable securities, I don't think has been answered yet. And I think that there are a number of things about the new Tax Act that were not enacted. But I would say this. We have said ourselves what we think the proper approach to operating income. We didn't design that because this tax law came along some years back. So we would think that you wouldn't include capital gains, unrealized capital gains, but we've got enough. I think, no matter how things turn out, the 15% tax doesn't bother me in the least, and we can figure ways once we know the rules where we will pay the 15% tax. And we were paying 52% taxes, federal income taxes, when I bought control in the partnership of Berkshire Hathaway. I mean, the tax rate come down dramatically, and the deferred tax that was embodied, for example, at Sanborn Map, when I was involved in a system that was allowed under the tax law to avoid that tax. But that was a huge tax, 52%. So we will live with this tax code, and we do not think corporations are overtaxed in the United States. And and I think that the conversation about how we lose out to the world and all that sort of thing is really nonsense. But we've got a new law that hasn't yet, the regulations haven't been written on, and when we know what the game is, we will absolutely figure out a way to pay 15% every year, and which generally we've been paying anyway. And as I pointed out, if there were 1,000 corporations in the United States that paid what Berkshire has been paying, nobody else in the United States, no individual, no corporation would ever pay any income tax, Social Security tax, gift tax, estate tax, anything else. 1,000 like Berkshire Hathaway would produce the revenue that's being produced by the federal government, that's being derived under the present tax code from everybody in the United States. And I don't feel badly about that, and I'd love to get it to what it's 1/500th or something of the sort. But I'd like to do it if we can do it at this rate. I'm happy to do it. I think we are privileged to live in the United States, but we also have to control spending. And that's something that Congress doesn't quite like to do. And they didn't like to do it when my dad went to Congress, but they've dug in more as the years have gone by. Charlie?
Well, we covered this subject earlier.
Yeah. Okay. Station 9. Am I right on this? Yeah.
My name is Avalon Gross, and I am from Los Angeles, California. I am a shareholder, and it's my 4th year coming to the Woodstock of capitalism.
Yeah. We're glad you came.
Thank you so much for everything, Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. What is the funniest story that you have never told about each other And also, what is the hardest part of your business?
I'll answer the second. The second part of your question is that we don't have a hard business. We love our business. Every morning when I get up, I feel good. I don't know what's going to happen that day. Maybe nothing will happen, but maybe something will happen. And if nothing else, I'll roll some T-bills or something. But I work with the greatest group of people you can imagine. I mean, we like each other, and nobody is after anybody else's job or anything of the sort. It's ideal working conditions, and it's 5 minutes from my home or thereabouts. So I haven't spent my life commuting. I just can't imagine having anything better. And Charlie's got a lot of funny stories you haven't heard, but we'll see which one he comes up with.
Well, I think Warren and I are naturally so ridiculous that we don't need very many funny stories. We each do things that are peculiar enough so that we can keep one another amused.
Tell him what you told the lawyer when we were buying Hochschild Kohn.
I don't remember. You tell him.
Well, you remember? It was 1966, and we were down in Baltimore buying a department store, and we needed a lawyer. And we needed a lawyer who was nearby and would do exactly as told. And Charlie came up with a very good lawyer from Wilmer Cutler's, I believe. And I don't know whether Charlie remembers the instructions he gave the lawyer or not.
No, I don't.
Oh, well, Charlie told the lawyer, who we'd never met before, and he said, well, he says, treat Warren like, I was 36 at the time or 35. He said, treat Warren like any other 90-year-old client. This guy knew exactly what he meant. And we made the deal in a hurry, and then we went to the bank, First National Bank, and I believe it was or Maryland National Bank, actually. And there was a fellow named Cammy Slack there, wasn't it, Charlie? And we wanted to borrow $6 million against a $12 million purchase. And Cammy looked at us with bewilderment. And he says, you want to borrow $6 million against a little old Hochschild Kohn? And Charlie and I said something to the effect, well, the Maryland National was our first call, and if they didn't want to do it, we had another bank we'd go to. And anyway, they let us the money. But when he said little old Hochschild Kohn, we immediately started thinking, maybe this isn't the best deal we've ever seen in our lives. And from that point on, we were trying to figure out how to sell it. So we had as much fun. Sandy Gottesman was involved with us then too, and we had as much fun out of deals that didn't work in a certain sense as the ones that did work. I mean, if you knew you were going to play golf and you were going to hit a hole-in-one on every hole, you just hit the ball and then when the hole is 300 yards away or 400 yards away, nobody would play golf. I mean, part of the fun of a game is the fact that you hit them into the woods, and sometimes you get them out, and sometimes you don't. So we are in the perfect sort of game, and we both enjoy it, and we have a lot of fun together, and we don't have to do anything we don't really believe in doing. I mean, we are not dictated to by any group, and so we get to follow our own. We get to forge our own destiny, and in a sense, forge the own principles by which we can run the company, and that's a huge luxury in life. And we don't want to be president of any other company in the world or CEO or anything else where we have to conform to certain things that we really don't want to conform to. Is that a fair description, Charlie?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Okay, Becky.
This question comes from David Cass, who is a professor at the Business School at University of Maryland. He says, at last year's annual meeting, Warren mentioned that Berkshire had taken a large stake in Activision Blizzard as a merger arbitrage play. Since the UK regulator has blocked its acquisition by Microsoft, has Berkshire reduced or sold its stake?
Well, I think in terms of what we do with stocks, we don't give information except when required to, which is in the 13F or whatever we file. And there's certain things you can actually figure out by looking at our 10Q, which we filed this morning, but you have to look pretty hard. But I would say this: I think Microsoft has been remarkably what's the word? Willing to cooperate with governing bodies, and I mean, they want to do the deal, and they've met the opposition, it seems to me, more than halfway. But that doesn't mean that it gets done if a given country, in this case the UK, wants to block it. They're in a better position to block it than the United States. That's just the way the world works. And that doesn't get solved by offering more money, or so I don't know how it turns out. But if it doesn't go through, I don't think it's through any shortcoming by either Microsoft or Activision. But not everything that should happen does happen. And well, we ran into it when we bought, made the deal with Dominion Energy 18 months ago, and they let us buy a good bit of what we wanted to buy, and then the U.S. government, in effect, said, you can't buy something else, which I think we would have done a better job with than anybody else did, and which the states involved did not object to it, which the customers didn't object to it. But you don't take on the United States government, and you try and figure out things that you won't have a problem with. And I think in that case, the U.S. government made a mistake. I think the British government's making a mistake in this case, but that's life in the big cities, sure, I would say. And what we do will depend on a lot of things. Charlie?
Well, I think what we do, you kissed that one off beautifully.
Okay, station 10.
Hi, Warren. Hi, Charlie. My name's Anderson Fuller, and I'm from Avonport, Nova Scotia in Canada. And before I ask my question, I just want to thank you for all you've done to give us insight into your minds as investors. So for me, the most compelling takeaway from Berkshire is your guys' emphasis on and successful use of properly aligned incentives. In my view, owning and leading a business has two central benefits. First, you directly benefit as the company goes through your equity in it, and second, you have autonomy. Incentives for employees are a bit easier to understand, such as offering benefits, fair pay, and creating a strong culture, but I've always struggled to understand them at the highest level. Even though you say Berkshire gives its managers significant flexibility, it must be less than what they had when they were independent. Additionally, you would think passion and a willingness to sell would be inversely correlated. So how exactly does Berkshire bridge this gap and incentivize owners of its subsidiaries to give up these benefits to Berkshire? Thank you.
Well, what we really hope to find is managers who love their business but don't like a lot of what comes with it as a public company. I mean, if they have to spend a lot of time listening to people tell them what to do about this or that, and they can't afford to irritate them, or they have to go along with their trade association because, or whatever they may call it, because you don't want to look like a free rider, and there's all kinds of things, compromises that people have to make in most jobs. And Charlie and I solved that problem. I had 5 bosses in my life, and I liked all 5 of them, and 2 of them were just huge factors in making my life better. But I liked all 5 of them. A couple of them were, some people here, J.C. Penney, Cooper Smith. I worked at 75 cents an hour, and I love working at Penny's. Well, I didn't love working at Penny's, but I love working for Cooper Smith, and it was 75 cents an hour. But I had to do what they told me to do, which was to sell men's shirts first, then men's clothing, then children's clothing, and so on. And I loved working for the newspaper, and I had a great manager when I was at the University of Nebraska. Got to work for Ben Graham. I mean, everything worked out, but there's nothing like working for yourself. And if you can't own a big company, working at Berkshire Hathaway for running a company is the closest thing you will get. You don't have to spend time courting analysts who you probably have contempt for in many cases. You don't have to spend time with banks, getting money, and particularly in terrible times. Yeah, there's all kinds of, you get a lot in the way of freedom that I would think would be meaningful to me, and it might be better if you own the whole place yourself, but maybe you've got siblings that want out. Maybe there's a million reasons why you may not be able to achieve that unless you sell to Berkshire. And that's easier probably if you have a family business where people want to go in different directions than it is with a public company. But there's still possibilities there. So that's why I think if I owned a public company and it was worth great many billions of dollars, and Berkshire Hathaway wanted to buy it, and the shareholders were willing to vote it, I would, considering the way I would feel about life. For one thing, I wouldn't want to retire at 65. I'd want to keep working, and there are reasons to sell to Berkshire, which Charlie and I, in certain positions, if we were on the other side, would take the deal, but it isn't for everybody. Charlie?
I think we have it pretty good, Warren. We've been very lucky, and I don't know. It seems to me that most of the people who are going to end up the way we did, they almost already know how to do it.
Well, the most important purchase in retrospect that we may have made was National Indemnity, not because specifically what it did, but what it led to. And Jack Ringwald controlled the company, and I knew him and liked him, and he knew me. And once a year, he'd get irritated when the Nebraska Department of Insurance or somebody would come around, and he said they always came around when the exorbitant racetrack was open, so they could. I mean, he had all these theories about why it was a pain in the neck to be regulated, and I told Charlie Hyder, next time Jack is in that mood where he's ready to sell just because he's tired of fooling around with all these guys, be sure and find him. And so Charlie called me one day and he says, Jack is in the heat. And I said, bring him over. And we made a deal. Well, that's why Jack sold. And he was happy after he made the deal. And I was happy after we made the deal. So there's a man that controlled the business, but just decided these people didn't seem to bother him as much once they were my problem and not his. And you just can't tell when lightning will strike. And that didn't do magnificent things for us initially, but just look at what it led to, and then, so you never, if you knew how you were going to, if you knew how you were going to shoot all 18 holes, it wouldn't be any fun playing. You wouldn't get on the first tee. I mean, it's it's the uncertainty, the fun of playing the game, the opponents, all kinds of things that make a game interesting. And I think Charlie and I are in the most interesting game in the world. Okay, Becky?
Here's a question from Simon Withers in Perth in Western Australia. It's been a long time since we've heard about See's Candy and NetJets. Could you please give us an update on See's performance and when you project it will run out of places to open stores in the United States? And could you also give us an overview of how NetJets has performed since its acquisition and whether it's achieved the potential you saw at the time of that acquisition?
Well, with See's, it hasn't been a question of opening stores. We found out that we have this wonderful brand that doesn't travel. The mystique, the actual product, the feelings people have about some things, as we said before. I mean, sometimes it's limited to given markets. Dr. Pepper sells at a huge rate in Dallas, Fort Worth, and maybe 10 times the percentage per capita maybe that it has in Detroit or Boston. And you say, well, how can that be? Well, the product's been around for a century and people travel and you have national advertising. And I'm not sure, but I keep learning more as I watch different brands. And Charlie and I, our economics were so good in California that we tried to, in many cases, the same experiment over and over again. It doesn't cost much to experiment. We've tried everything in the world to cause the brand to travel. And we always think we were right for the first week, and then we find out that the magic, we can beat any other candy store pretty much, but there aren't any candy stores anymore to speak of. The world has changed. So See's is 101 years now. It has magic, and it has limited magic in sort of the adjacent West. You can almost, it's gravitational almost. And then you get to the East, and incidentally in the East, people prefer dark chocolate to milk chocolate. In the West, people prefer milk chocolate to dark. The East can sell miniatures in dark. The West, I mean, there's all kinds of crazy things in the world that consumers do, but you want to keep observing it because you do learn a little. And with Charlie and I, the temptation to keep trying things because the economics were so good if we succeeded. So we tried various things. And of course, every manager wants to try it that comes along because they've learned, that it should work, but it doesn't work. But that's what makes it very interesting. And NetJets, we have really learned how to distinguish, and justifiably distinguish, a service to people, so that if you have to be very well-to-do to use it. But if you're very well-to-do, you're spending your heirs' money. I mean, it's what I told my Aunt Alice after she went from teaching to be worth millions and millions of dollars, and she came to see me. She'd never been married, and she said, "Can I afford to buy this for a coat in 1968 or 9?" And I said, "Alice, you aren't buying it. Your nieces and nephews are buying it because that's who you're leaving your money to." And speaking on behalf of your nieces and nephews, I'd say, we want you to buy it. And it's the same way, do your heirs want you to fly around in NetJets, or do you want to leave a little more money to your foundation or to your kids? And the way to solve that one is to offer your kids a few hours themselves, and then their attitude can change. So it's in a class by itself. It's done what Ferrari has done in a different sort of way in cars. Ferrari sells 11,000 cars a year. I mean, maybe 12,000. And, they're known throughout the world. And we'll have a Chevy dealership in Austin or something. We'll sell as many cars, but we're not Ferrari. And NetJets has 600 counting Europe, it's maybe 650, but we're going to buy 100 planes this year, and we won't sell any because got a backlog, and we took a NetJet flight over to Tokyo, and we arrived in good shape, and we spent a couple days there, and we flew back, and there's just nothing to it. Now, you can say, well, you're getting sort of decadent and all that in your old age, but the money will go to philanthropy, and the money will probably be $100 billion or more, and I figure the philanthropies want me to spend a few bucks on myself. All it has to do is be better than the last dollars that are spent by various philanthropies, which have plenty of problems finding things to do that make lots of sense. So, NetJets, there isn't any competitor. I mean, we looked at the other day, Wheels Up, stock came out of $10 a couple years ago. It was selling at 48 cents the other day, and they've got 12,600 people that have given $1 billion, a little over $1 billion on prepaid cards where they've given them money and they get a certain number of hours later on. And they don't, I think there's a good chance that some people are going to be very disappointed later on. And when they have money to do NetJets, they know they'll get on the same planes with the same pilots as I and my family have flown on since before we bought the company. So it's not shaped by, the decision wasn't shaped by some commercial objective. A couple of years before, I'd never heard of NetJets, and Frank Rooney mentioned it to me, and I bought share immediately, and we bought the company, and my kids have to fly commercial sometimes, but sometimes they get to use ours too. But I've never flown anything else, and why would I? I mean, it's the gold standard, and nobody will match our fleet. I mean, if you've got 600 planes, you've got them a lot more places in the United States than anybody else will have theirs. I think we're the second largest fleet, counting the commercial airliners, and our fleet's growing, like I say, at the rate of 100 planes a year. So it's a marvelous company, and Adam Johnson has performed. You just can't believe what he's done with the business, and it was a tough model for a long time, but he's brought it where it is, and we should have a wonderful company for forever. Charlie?
Well, NetJets has been remarkable. You can argue that it's worth as much as any airline now.
Oh, it's so different. And Charlie, we had a hard time selling Charlie a NetJets membership, and then we figured the way to get him to buy a membership was to put a coach seat in the fuselage. and that really knocked him off. I mean, I think he's the only one we sold on the basis of.
I used to come to the Berkshire annual meetings on coach from Los Angeles, and it was full of rich stockholders, and they would clap when I came into the coach section. I really liked that.
But I got to tell you, we semi-corrupted him. He feels he kind of has to explain it, but he still flies at NetJets now. So, and it'd be crazy not to. You know, your heirs are paying for it. I mean, if you find me anybody whose estate came in at less than zero because what they spent on NetJets threw them into that position, let me know. But I've never seen a case yet. It won't be the case with the Buffett family, and it's the residual bottom beneficiary that's paying for your membership, and it's a little hard to get used to paying that much money, though, when you live like Charlie and I have most of our lives. Okay. We will go to section 11.
Hello, my name is Humphrey Liu. I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia. First, I wanted to add my thanks to you and Mr. Munger and Mr. Buffett and all of Berkshire for throwing this grand event each year. Looking at the global trends, it increasingly does seem that zero-emission vehicles may have finally reached the cusp of mass adoption. Do you see any opportunities in this space, either in specific vehicle manufacturers or in related technologies?
Well, I would say that Charlie and I for long have felt that the auto industry is just too tough. You know, the Ford Motor Company, I mean, Henry Ford looked like he owned the world with the Model T, and he brought down the price dramatically. He took up wages dramatically. He might have been, with a different personality or some different views, he might have been elected president of the United States. I mean, there's a good book that came out on that recently that told about the story of tells a little about Nebraska in terms of it, but Henry Ford and Thomas Edison joining up, but maybe a year or two ago. If you're interested in autos, you ought to read that book. But Henry Ford did that, and 20 years later, that they were losing money, and they had a guy with a gun in his pocket, I think Harry Bennett, that was running the Ford Motor Company. It was on its way to the junk heap when the whiz kids came in, and Henry Ford II, Hank the Deuce, as they called him, brought in Tex Thornton and my friend R.J. Miller and a few people. But it's just, I was reading the other day, actually, the 1932 annual report of General Motors. And it's one of the best annual reports I've read. It's a totally honest, assessment of exactly where they were. They had 19,000 dealers then, and the population, as I mentioned earlier, was about 120 million or so. And now with 330 million people, all brands in the United States have like 18,000 dealers or something. It's just a business where you've got a lot of worldwide competitors. They're not going to go away, and it looks like there are winners at any given time, but it doesn't get you a permanent place, although, as I mentioned, I would say Ferrari is in a special place, but they only sell 11 or 12,000 cars a year. And U.S. last year, I think there were 14 million something. And it's not a business where we find it fascinating to be in. We like our dealership operation. But I don't think I can tell you what the auto industry will look like 5 or 10 years from now. I do think that you're right, that you will see a change in the vehicles, but you won't see anybody that owns the market because they changed the vehicle. Charlie?
Well, the electric vehicle is coming big time, and that's a very interesting development. At the moment, it's imposing huge capital costs and huge risks. And I don't like huge capital costs and huge risks.
And we're subsidizing it in the United States, and we're actually doing it, putting in a pro-labor time. I mean, it is subject to politics like you can't believe, too. But it's going to be with us. We're not going to quit driving cars. And the American public has a love affair with them. But I think I know where Apple's going to be in 5 or 10 years, and I don't know where the car companies are going to be in 5 or 10 years. And I may be wrong, but that's Charlie and I follow the auto business with intense interest. Charlie's firm was the specialist in General Motors on the Pacific Coast Stock Exchange, and that was a franchise, wasn't it, Charlie?
Yeah, by working very hard, we could make a minor amount of money.
Yeah. It wasn't minor at the time, though. But
yeah, it was. It was pretty minor at the time, even.
Yeah. Well, that was pretty minor. Okay. Becky?
This question comes from Lindsay Peter Schumacher in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Does the current size of the Federal Reserve balance sheet concern you? In particular, the result of quantitative easing, the Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet out of nothing. The net effect, in essence, is a form of single-entry accounting, creating something of value out of nothing other than a series of book entries, and wondering what Mr. Munger thinks about this as well.
Well, I don't think the Federal Reserve is the problem, and I think they can't solve the fiscal problem. I do not worry about the Federal Reserve, and I think it's fulfilling the functions for which it was established. I probably would not have been. They have two objectives, and I would not have been one probably that would have changed the inflation objective to 2% a year from 0. I think that I think that if you tell your people that you're shooting to depreciate your currency at 2% a year, that has a lot of implications, although it feels good to a lot of people. A lot of people want a little inflation, but nobody wants a lot of inflation, except somebody's got a lot of debts. And I do not worry about the Federal Reserve balance sheet. I enjoy looking at it, and the numbers are big. I always like big numbers, but it is not. It's interesting. One of the most interesting figures to me is currency in circulation. I mean, it is gone. They were saying cash is trash back in 2007 and 8, and all of that cash is going to disappear. Well, if you look at the Federal Reserve balance sheet, it's gone from $800 billion to $2.2 trillion. And most of that's in $100 bills, overwhelmingly. And if you figure it out, I think there's about 50 $100 bills per person, babies, everybody in the United States. And I would really like to know where all of that is. I mean, nobody's hoarding euro dollars, in South America or Africa or wherever. And the demand for currency now, it's some of it maybe used to be subtle drug dealers' activities and all of that. But anybody thinks cash is trash ought to look at the Federal Reserve balance sheet, and actually you can look at how many $5 bills and $2 bills and ones and all that, and the action has been in $100 bills. I mean, it is just astounding the way that $100 bills have spread, and of course I don't know where they are, and I don't think the Fed can know exactly, but they probably make a lot better guess than I could. But I do know it's happened, and you can watch it every week, and you'll watch currency in circulation probably grow a little bit. And believe me, cash is not trash. Charlie?
Well, I don't know where we're headed with all of this. It's been very extreme. I think that you could be pretty extreme in fighting depressions and so forth if you reverted afterwards to a period of some discipline. But if you're some discipline, but if you're going to just keep borrowing, printing money and spending it, I think eventually it causes bad trouble. And you can see it in Latin America. Latin America let its currency get out of control all the time, and of course it lagged the United States in economic achievement greatly. So I think we pay a price if we ever give up our old ways entirely and go into a new world where we just try and print money to make it easier to get through the year.
paid a price in World War II. I mean, everybody, school kids and everybody else, myself included, I mean, we bought what were originally called war bonds and defense bonds and savings bonds and all that. But from 1942 to 1944 or 5, you paid out $18.75 and you got $25 back, and every kid saved savings and stamps and all that. But when you got all through, you had 120% of GDP in the national debt instead of 30 or 40%. And we had a lot of inflation subsequently, a lot. So the people that bought those bonds in support of the war had a portion of their purchasing power taken away from them. Well, there wasn't anything wrong with that particularly, but when a country gets in the habit of doing that, I think it's tough to figure out where the breaking point is with society, but I don't think you want to come anywhere close to it.
Yeah, but it's also tough to have a mass of people unemployed. That's the tension.
Yeah. Well, that's why the Fed has two objectives in terms of employment and inflation, but they are not the ones that create the deficits. And so far, the system has worked pretty well, although, like I say, it's been...
So far, the man who's jumped off a tall building is all
right
until he hits the ground.
Yeah. Well, but there could be ways we can stop now at the third floor or the sixth floor. We don't know what floor it is, but we know it isn't having hit the ground. But the question, politically, it's very, very, very tempting to vote appropriations, and it's not fun to vote taxes. And Russell Long, head of the Senate Finance Committee, they got a building named after him now. He said, don't tax you, don't tax me, tax that guy behind the tree. And basically, that is the attitude of, it's the reality of what is useful in politics. And so far, this country's managed to work very well with a lot of things that could theoretically cause a lot of problems, but it doesn't guarantee us the future on it. And being the reserve currency lets us do a lot of things, but it also creates a lot of consequences if we screw it up. Charlie?
Well, we're beating a subject to death, but it is a problem. I wish we had a solution.
Okay, with that, we'll go to station one and see if we...
Hello, Mr. Buffett and Mr. Munger. My name's Connor. I'm an economics student at the University of Nottingham. My question for you today is, during the pandemic, we witnessed supply chain shortages, especially from Asia. As a result, companies have chosen, with political tensions, to move production away. Should companies make these decisions, and should the government support them?
Charlie?
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's logical if you're in business and you can make the thing in Mexico way cheaper. It's natural to open a factory in Mexico and get your parts cheaper, and a lot of the auto manufacturers have done exactly that. On the other hand, nobody wants to hollow out the whole country so all the manufacturing jobs are elsewhere and we're all living like a bunch of farmers, like English colonies in 1820 or something. And these ideas are, of course, in big tension. We don't have that much foreign production. Right, Warren?
Yeah, well, but we've lost, originally Berkshire Hathaway is the textile manufacturer. It lost because the South became feasible versus the North, and of course then eventually
The South got expensive compared to China.
Sure, and society benefits, and some people get killed in that sort of a situation. And a rich society should take care, one way or another, and of people who worked in our shoe factories, people who worked in our textile companies. I mean, if you worked in our textile operation in 1964, when we took it over, half our workers only spoke Portuguese, and they weren't getting great wages at all. But now you could do it in the South, and we were doomed to go out of business. And it wasn't the fault of the worker in any way, shape, or form. It wasn't our fault. We kept trying to compete.
Well, it was TVA had cheap power down there.
Sure.
And textile is really congealed power.
And air conditioning changed everything, but the heat in those damn places were impossible. That's a lot of things. But then it moves offshore in many ways, and net, the country is better off because of it, but it displaces a lot of people who really can't do something else in life. You can't talk about retraining somebody that's 55 or 60 and speaks only Portuguese and really tell them they're going to have a great future in New Bedford, Mass. So you don't want to be glib about it. And we can afford to take care of those people. And we've got some systems that work reasonably well, but there's a tension between, what about the person that doesn't do anything and all that kind of stuff. So these are not easy problems to solve, but I would say that by and large, we want the whole world to prosper. We do not want to be we don't want the United States to be a country of extraordinary prosperity and have the rest of the world
starving.
No, it isn't going to work, and it particularly isn't going to work in a nuclear world. So, and you can have your own feelings about it as a humane person, but it doesn't. It is not. It can be done better, and we've got the resources to do it. I mean, the output of this country, what can be done with a lot fewer people and doing more specialized things. And of course, it has been. The work week in the United States, in my lifetime has dropped dramatically. And people still feel busy, and it will be the human lot to say, how can I get all these things done? But my mother didn't drive 3 kids any place. I mean, you want to go any place, if you were lucky and when you got old enough, you had a bicycle. The world just keeps looking at everything moving up as becoming sort of a base that leaves them somewhat dissatisfied. And with our prosperity, we can do a lot of things we couldn't do in 1930, and including taking care of people that get displaced by the fact that somebody else can do that work and improve their lot in life. And we got to make sure that we have the best system that takes care of the people who get displaced by that. But doing that in a political system we have and everything, we'll make a lot of mistakes along the way, but we got to keep moving in that direction. And
the really interesting thing about it is that Adam Smith was right, that the free market capitalism automatically, with a lot of property in private hands and free trade and all that, automatically creates GDP per capita that grows and helps everybody, including the people at the bottom. Helps everybody a lot. But inherent in the process, there's a lot of pain in that free market capitalism. For instance, to the Portuguese workers in a textile company in New Bedford. And nobody's ever figured out how to take all the pain out of it. We do have government safety nets to take some of the pain out. We make those safety nets a little bigger as time goes by. But apart from that, if you try and take all the pain out, you'll also take all the gains out of it. You won't have a growing GDP per capita. You'll have an economy like Russia's, which has been characterized as saying they pretend to pay us and we pretend to work.
Yeah. Yeah, the other systems haven't worked better, but it also produces more and more disparities in wealth, and people that do nothing but get assets under management without actually performing anything extra make fortunes. And I mean, it's the job of government to keep the best aspects of capitalism while not causing people that only speak Portuguese to suffer in the process. I mean, the two aren't compatible politically over time, and we stumble along making progress on things like Social Security and all that, and we are a lot better off than we are when I was born.
Net, the United States has done a very good job of this tension between capitalistic growth and a growing social safety net. We can be pretty proud of our country looking backward.
Yeah. That may be why we have 25% of the world's GDP, starting with 0.5% of the population, and did it in a few centuries. I mean, it's a miracle. And it wasn't because we were smarter. Well, you got to say that there must be something to the system that's worked pretty well, even though it's produced a civil war and all kinds of things, and women, not getting a shot at anything, even after they passed the 19th Amendment. It's a work in progress. I think actually there's been progress, but it's mankind's nature to see the things wrong with it if you've.
It's even worse, it's man's nature to take the progress as a right, not something to be earned or strived for, but something that should automatically just flow in over the transom. And that attitude is poison. It doesn't do anybody any good.
Okay, now ask us an easy question, Becky.
This question comes from Doug DeShiel. Since the accounting rules changed requiring Berkshire to report the change in fair value of its equity investments through the income statement, Mr. Buffett has repeatedly told shareholders to ignore those changes as they're not reflective of the long-term returns that those investments will produce. Recently, Mr. Buffett has argued that hold-to-maturity accounting used by the banks to avoid reflecting the changes in fair value of bank investment portfolios in the income statement and the shareholder equity account do a disservice to its various stakeholders. Can Mr. Buffett elaborate on why he views mark-to-market accounting differently for banks in comparison to Berkshire?
I believe in both cases, in doing it on the balance sheet and not in the income statement. And it's a very tough problem that the auditors face, is that obviously the income statement feeds into the balance sheet, but the balance sheet tells you whether deposits can be paid. It tells you a lot of things, and we show it on our balance sheet. We believe in showing market values on our balance sheet. We just don't believe in running it through the income account. And in getting there, we would put it in other comprehensive income like it was for a long time. So I sympathize to some extent with a far extent with the audit group, but they have to really decide whether they want the balance sheet to represent values, except it doesn't reflect them on the upside. If we buy a See's candy and it's worth way more money, so it's conservative in that sense. But or whether they want to have an income account that becomes meaningless to people, because it really changes every 5 seconds. I mean, while the market's closed today, but we have days. Well, I guess Apple was up, 7 or 8 points on Friday. I mean, that's $7 billion. I mean, that's a crazy income account. It is a reflection of where we stand at that point. And of course, if you're a bank where you're putting out money really in things that people sort of mortgages, I mean, primarily, they're a terrible instrument for a bank to own, but a great instrument for a consumer to buy and build into the whole society now in a way that was entirely different than the past. You've got to pay attention to whether they've gotten out of whack in terms of what the value of what they own and what can be demanded of them tomorrow morning. And if we had all of our money that could be demanded from us tomorrow morning, we'd have to behave a lot differently than Berkshire does. So I really think the way to do it is the way we recommend doing, which is exactly what was being done until a few years ago. I recommend the shareholders look at it that way, but we're going to follow the rules, obviously, that the SEC, state authorities and everybody require of us. But I'll still explain to the shareholders exactly what I would explain to my sister about what really counts at Berkshire. And I think every management actually has an obligation to do that. And instead of it, they go in the other direction and give them a lot of figures that are total nonsense. You can't imagine some of the, EBITDA I thought was about as bad as you could get, but they kept going, and earnings before everything, EBE. And so, but that doesn't change what I would tell my sister, who's here in the audience, I hope. And I should tell all the shareholders. And we'll consistently do what is legal, and we'll consistently say what we think is right. Charlie?
Yeah.
We want owners who understand what they own. Now, that doesn't mean they have to understand the detail of it, but that's why we have people that have been around 50 or 60 years. That doesn't mean that they read the 10-Qs or anything like that, but they feel we're telling it to them like, they live next door to us.
Yeah, I don't know what the accountants were thinking when they made that change. It strikes me as bonkers.
Yeah.
Absolutely bonkers. I don't see how anybody who understands how business is really operated and should be operated by owning managers would have made that accounting change. The accountants did it just because they had a wild moment.
25 years ago, I suggested to the audit profession that that the audit committee ask auditors 4 questions. And the shareholders would know a lot more about the company if those questions were asked, but it wasn't good for the auditors to be asked those questions because it might increase their liability if they answered them, and the client didn't want them to answer them because the management didn't want them to.
No, they want a system where if they follow certain rules, they're safe. And that's understandable. But I don't think they passed this rule requiring changes in marketable securities to go through the income account quarterly. They didn't do that to protect themselves from liability. They just did that for some crazy reason of their own. You get a bunch of people who are all drawing a lot of pay out of a big complicated system and rising in it like so many officers in the Army. God knows what they'll do if you put them in a little room by themselves and tell them to invent new accounting standards.
Well, to our auditor, remember that's Charlie talking. And but I agree with him 100%. He's 99. He can get away with more than I can get away with. Okay, station 2. But what he said is enormously important. I mean, you got to have some insights into what the hell really goes on. And
even if you're an accountant.
Yeah. Okay, station 2.
Dear Warren, dear Charlie, my name is Victoria Wenthrop. I am 22 years old and I study in Munich at the CDTM, the Center of Digital Technology and Management. As your grandchildren are more in my age group, let me ask you, how do you transfer your wisdom to your grandchildren and heirs? How do you lead them to investing? Do you see value in investing as a family or individually? Thank you.
I'm going to let Charlie do the answering on it. He's got more.
Well, I have more grandchildren, but I am quite philosophical about my grandchildren not thinking exactly the way I do. It seems to me that's almost the natural course of life. And I just live my life my own way, and they can observe it as an example if they want to. And if they don't, they can try some other way. I don't like it when they try some other way. And I have to pretend that I like some of the boyfriends and girlfriends I don't like. But I just struggle through like everybody else. And usually I just bite my tongue and keep silent. That's my way of handling it.
Well, I would say that I think that, in my case, my 3 children have grown a lot smarter in the last 30 years, and I think I've grown smarter.
Well, I know, but you needed a lot of help.
That is for sure. No, I would totally acknowledge that. That's why I had the room to go. I mean, I had plenty of room for improvement, but
we all had a lot to grow. I worked a year for U.S. Steel, which was in their fabrication department in Los Angeles, a big operation. The thing was utterly doomed, and 3 years later, it went back to greenfields. The whole thing was razed to the ground. I did not see it coming. Now, to be that ignorant and that, as I was at that age, it was a sin. And my professors, by and large, were even more ignorant than I was. Nobody had observed the basic economics of business in a scientific way at all when I was young.
Well, if we're getting into confession time, I have to tell you, it's 3:30. So we don't want to keep going on. Who knows what we'll be saying in another half hour. So, so I thank you all very much for coming. At 4:30, we will have the shareholders meeting here, and we're continuing to sell goods for another 20 or 25 minutes. We've already broken all kinds of records, but let's really make it tough for comparisons next year. And again, I thank you for coming. Come next year, and maybe we'll figure out the answer to a few more of these questions.